Thank you, Ms. Minody-Miller. Now we're going to open the floor up for questions. If I can get the presenters up here, we have one. Okay, you'll be the first question, second in the back. Let's get our presenters up front. And we have one mic. Does the audience feel comfortable just projecting your questions to the presenters? Yes? Okay, great. Up first, yes.
Just to the last presenter. Sorry. I forgot your name.
Stephanie.
So I think myself and a couple other people, we went through that.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that you have a number before, like it'll say 23 female.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, because like I remember going through it and being told you can't take university courses, like just go to college. And I remember that. And I went to university, graduated from university. But I'm just curious, like I've talked about it after I left high school.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how can we help these students when they're in high school? Who can they talk to? Because I wish I had someone I could talk to so I can report that, adding a counselor, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, you can't do this.
Yeah. And sorry, I cut you off there.
And then I had another story where like a teacher said the same thing, because one time there was a classroom, a girl wanted to take the attendance and she was the only Black girl in there. And then he basically said, oh, this is what we used to say back in the day, you know? Meaning, minding more.
Oh, yes.
Stuff. And by the toe, like things like that, you know? And nothing ever happened to them. Still me.
Honestly, I find it like it gives me chills when I hear stories like this. And I don't think I have an answer to your question. We are working on a paper. So I am talking with Jude about the discussion of like, okay, how can we address this? So we're at that step where we're opening the discussion. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not going to come up here and talk like I'm an expert. So I have previously studied academic performance, but that's not the same as experiences in the classroom. But we need to have more representation in schools. That's one thing that I think is clear, so that people have someone that they can go talk to. And who's going to listen to them and actually understand their experiences. In terms of the number beside the name, that was the age of the participant interview at the time of the interview. So a lot of these were recounts of their high school experience, which shows that they're lasting experiences and they aren't something that really you can shake off. So I think like a lot of it is the representation. And I love the question of what can we do, but it's gonna come out soon in a discussion with Jude and I shortly.
Okay. Sorry, you said you ended up going to university? Congratulations. I think I just want to add, it's not really like a solution, but I think like people push through anyway, you know, like I'm not Black, but I have received the same treatment from career counselors. And, you know, people just end up finding a way, like, you know, where you belong, you know, and you know, like what kind of person you are and you know what you're capable of. And like, I think people still find a way to push through, but I definitely agree that there is a need to support students in that way. I'm sorry?
No, it's saying not everybody find a way to push through.
Yeah.
But I know with the public board now, there is a pathway for students to report when incidences like that happen. There is a human rights advisor. There are identity-specific social workers that are in place to address systemic biases like that, like open racism like that. There is the anti-hate protocol that's been rolled out within and across the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, and anti-hate modules. So when incidences of hate happen, there are modules that students and classrooms can access to provide that coaching. And then there is consequences that kind of level up to suspensions and expulsions if it's continued behavior. So based on the grassroots efforts, and it took a long time and it's not a perfect system, but I do want to give at least some folks some hope that the ship is shifting, like the world is shifting. Students are way more empowered. Students are way more connected. Students know their things, right? Like they know how to self-advocate. And now with these phones and these smartphones, educators that make racist comments have their careers ruined. And I tell students all the time, your best weapon is your smartphone. If you're feeling like you're not being listened to, or you're going to have or it's just suspended. And so again, like there is a shift that is happening. It's not perfect. A lot of stuff has come to the surface. There are some closeted racists that are being like the spotlight is on them now, and they have to change their behaviors. I do think it's efforts like this, though. I do think it's community. I do think it's people that come back and say, this was my experience in school, that helps to push the momentum. Yeah. Because those 23-year-olds that are sharing their experiences, it's what's propelled this anti-racism work to happen within the board, because now they're coming back as alums and sharing their experience.
And it's such an important thing to do, because right now it's such a like tumultuous time politically. And you have those people saying like, oh, like wokeness has taken over campuses and like, we can't say anything anymore. And like, these incidents are still happening very recently at schools very near us. So yeah, anyway, thank you so much for adding on to that.
Black graduation.
I'm asking like 3 or 4 questions. I'm going to try and ask one question that will tie in all 4. Okay. So, the challenge of feeling isolated within our communities is not only recognized but appreciated, especially with young person. Even more so, because then that isolation, as was highlighted, becomes you being different within your family, within your associated community, which is very, very helpful and impactful in promoting mental well-being, but it's not being recognized as such. And then within like generalized homogeneous communities, and then the general society. So you are like almost lost at sea when you're trying to navigate being a young Black African, whether of second heritage or not, within colonial Canada. So the question that I have that I'm trying to see how we can resolve that issue is this, and I'll try not to make it hard. What is the rudder that we need to sort of steer through this, right? In your perspective, from what you see, and you know that the rudder is a very, very little thing that controls where the boat goes, but it's tiny but quite impactful in the work that it's doing, right? So I'm looking at all of this, and it seems like, whoa, this big boats that we're in, we can't navigate this ocean of challenge. But I think there must be a rudder, a little help that will help us kind of navigate this. So in your work, in your area of study, what do you see as that little contribution that will help us navigate this ocean of systemic racism that we're on?
If you want to.
I always have. So.
No, I was asking where.
I'm going to try not to make this long, but in my head, I have Shirley Chisholm in my head, and where if there's no seat for you at the table, you bring your folding chair.
Yes.
And if they don't want you at that table, you got to create your own table. And so there's a piece of me as a social worker from what we talked about yesterday. We keep talking about where I'm in an education system where I have to create standardized social workers so that they could become agents in the system. And then it's being able to navigate that and teach them the thing and then unteach it. Like, okay, this is what they want me to tell you, and this is what I'm going to tell you. But it's really hard I don't know that I have a router per se, but it's really understanding that we have to put this stuff out there. We have to do it. And what's fun with the new generations is that they're from here and they're realizing that as people who were born here, I'm still being treated like my immigrant parents were being treated. And so the discrimination is that much more like, WTF, who are you talking to like this? I'm free. Like, what is this? And so people are standing up more to each other. And the more we have this research, it's really being able to say, okay, I'm taking your research. I'm taking your research. I'm taking your research. And this is what I have. And I'm adding on to it, or like being able to then pursue the research. Because scholars, I have a colleague in psychology who wanted to study racism in elementary school. Her other colleagues at the university was like, why you want to go do that? That's not a thing. She's the only Black person in her department. And then she finally got the grant, but you're fighting everyone around you to, go demonstrate these things. And then the schools are fighting you. Your colleagues are fighting you. And so what's happening in Ontario is fun, because in Quebec then we could use this and say, look, this is happening. It's not just happening in one place. And how do we support each other? But we also have to be doing groundwork. So I don't think I have a right answer for you. So there are things you have to put out there, but they're also saying we have to do without waiting for out there to say, oh, you're right. You're right. We got to go and, do all these great things for you to get better. We also have to see how we can help ourselves navigate this, this boat. So not let other people navigate the boat. And how do we take, how do we learn how to navigate this boat and get the boat where we need to go? I think.
Yeah. Something to add before we take the next question? We're ready for the next question. Oh, that you made eye contact before, yes. Go ahead.
Future doctor. Give me a month. I'm embracing it. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Speak louder, please.
You just put a little mic, they got
We're bringing the mic.
Yeah, they got that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very soft spoken, so I will need this. I just wanted to say thank you for what you've shared with us today. And the story that Fakhruddin was sharing based off of his personal experience is not it's a very common one, especially within Black boys and men who have gone through the education system. The question that I did have is, I noticed that the folks who were interviewed after the fact, but I was curious to know what the outcomes were in terms of, their trajectory after being discouraged from pursuing the pathways that they wanted to. I think that's a really important question, given the stories that we are hearing in our communities. It's one that's also very personal to me and my own family. I have two brothers, and one of them in particular was spoken to in the same way and ended up, pursuing a career in law and was incredibly successful. But it wasn't without the help of mentors. It wasn't without the help of community backing him up. So I'm really curious to know what happened next for some of these kids that were interviewed. Thank you.
In this particular sample, the youth did talk about going on and pursuing higher education. They didn't listen to what the career counselor said. They really dismissed it. They talked about it as being like, okay, they're telling me to do something lower, but I'm going to prove them wrong. Mm-hmm. And that was the narrative that was the majority of the interviews that shared what they did after. I will say that the majority did talk about going to university. I have the slide here of just how many completed post-secondary education. Just one second. It's not up, but I'll read the number. Okay, so only one individual out of the 32 indicated that they had no post-secondary education. There was a few who were still, there was 5 who were still completing high school, but 28%, so 9 individuals had completed a bachelor's degree. And 5, so 15% had completed a diploma that was below a bachelor's degree, but they might have still been pursuing their bachelor's at the time.
I'd be curious to know the opposite statistics, that don't make it or don't have that mentorship.
Yeah, so we...
Future study.
Yeah, future study. I'll tell you.
And that is where we need disaggregated data, and that it stems from universities and colleges like making public how many students enrolled that are Black, Asian, and Canada apparently doesn't take that, right? And because we don't take that, there's very little we can complain. Again, I'm sitting here, I'm hearing my brother say that, and I'm like, yeah, that's a Tuesday. Right?
Yeah.
And ask every young Black person who have had to navigate high school in Canada, and that is a Tuesday for us, right? But because some of us went on to post-secondary education, fighting it all the way through, a whole lot of brothers didn't, right? And because there's no data to show that, hey, the graduating class of Kipling College in Ontario had 28 Black people. 7 went on to post-secondary education, went on to university. 10 went on to college. What happened to the rest? We don't know, because it's not being gathered and spoken about. We can't analyze and interrogate it to the benefit of trying to change the system. And I think it's not being collected intentionally. Absolutely right.
Yeah, and I will say this is coming from a very small sample of 32 qualitative studies, so it's not generalizable to a large scale. But I would be really curious because hers was a Canadian national study, and it was more statistical, so by surveys. So I'm wondering if it was captured there. But you make a really great point, and I think it's something that in the work that I'm doing, that we're doing with Should, that we should maybe discuss and see if we have any numbers anywhere about people who don't go on to completing.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions. I want you to have time for coffee break. Well, yes, the closing ceremony, also the coffee break. So you have to keep going with these conversations.
Well, thank you so much for your beautiful presentations. On generational differences, that I have a question. So I'm a social worker with a background in child protection, as well as offering psychotherapy services for children. The issues that were highlighted, they're often pathologized in these fields. So my question is, what are your thoughts on breaking the cycle of pathologizing issues that, issues that you raised?
Do you mind elaborating just a little bit?
So, okay, how do I elaborate this? So what are your thoughts on normalizing these issues that these generational differences? What are your thoughts on breaking the cycle? Because often as a Black social worker myself, I get colleagues coming for consultations, and these issues are made to be not what they actually are. For most of us in this room, those are normal issues, they're everyday issues, but they're escalated, which prevents families from seeking services. So my question is, do you have any thoughts on how
how we can support our colleagues, on how generally we can normalize these issues in institutions like Children's Aid Society, for example, or mainstream organizations working with children.
I don't mean to sort of, what I'm hearing, and maybe that would help, is if a young person confides to a social worker that my parents don't listen to me, the pathology is that the parents are neglected. And that would lead to that social services intervention, which is a lot more problematic than it is resolution. Right? So,
thank you for the elaboration. I am, in understanding now. I think in my opinion, because I also come from a counseling and psychotherapy background, that's my education. And I am disappointed to say that a lot of programs actually don't mandate a multicultural counseling course. A lot of that training and education is actually optional. It's kind of up to you, and you can take it if you want to, you don't have to. And I think that is where we are doing wrong right at the start. I think education is the start of everything, and we've talked every presentation we've gone to, every session we mentioned having representation, having providers. So it's not just educating non-Black providers, but it's also making sure that we have Black providers coming into the system, and making sure that that we are not making it more difficult for these people to join these professions. I think we really do our communities a disservice by making multicultural counseling an option, right? We're sending people out there to talk to a Black individual, maybe for the first time in a therapeutic setting, and they have no idea what that person is going through. Even for my own thesis, I did research on matching in therapy, and my own participants noted that, especially after the murder of George Floyd, it became essential for some people to see Black providers, and that there were some places that weren't even able to offer that they would call a counseling center and be hey, I'm looking for this. And that there was no one there who was Black who was able to speak with them. So we really, again, do our communities a disservice by not having providers who represent them. So I believe that there is a huge need to push for that as well. I think I understand in terms of pathologizing those issues specifically. I think that's why we need to have the options for people to see providers of color who are better able to understand and represent them. And again, just making training mandatory. Dr. Sinha mentioned a lot of beautiful trainings that his lab helped develop. And I think it's things like that should be necessary. Even in what Stephanie presented, there was a youth who said they only ever had one Black teacher in their lives, which really says something, when you which really says something when you go places and you don't see people who look like you don't see people who are understanding of your experience. So it really comes at multiple levels, but I think for me personally, it starts at education, and we can't be sending professionals out there who don't know how to work with people. Thank you for all the